been 2 years since I made the first part to this video. I guess better late than never to make a part 2, but in that time in industry, I've learned a lot, and it made me think that maybe I had some new thoughts that I wanted to add to what I talked about in part 1. I'll leave a link to that video if you haven't already seen it, but all the points in this video do stand by themselves, so if you haven't watched part 1, you should still be able to get a lot out of this video. This is going to sound like it contradicts something that I have said a number of times on the channel, but I think there's a good reason for it. Especially if you're coming into college without a whole lot of coding experience, or maybe no coding experience at all. Your first course is going to introduce you to a programming language. Maybe that's Java or Python or anything else. When you're first getting started with coding, you're really just trying to learn the fundamentals. You're not trying to learn a bunch of different coding languages at once. It's not super useful to be able to say hello world in 50 different languages. I did do that once and it was a lot of fun, but yeah, not super useful. But this point is about avoiding the trap of going super deep into one programming language at the expense of never really exploring any other languages. Once you start building your own stuff and experimenting, which is something that I talked about the importance of in part 1, something to consider is choosing the best tool for the job. And a mistake that I often made early on, and I still sometimes slip back into today, is choosing a worse tool for the job because I am more comfortable with it and because I was intimidated by the idea of needing to learn a new language. Forcing yourself to at least learn the basics of another language once you have a decent handle on your first language is a great way to open yourself up to new types of projects that you can do. You'll learn about all the different kinds of considerations you might need to make depending on what language you're using. And just in general, it's going to help you grow as a developer instead of just becoming super reliant on only that one primary language. You can also put it on your resume, which as a freshman is probably going to be a little bit sparse, so that's a nice benefit as well. I've said it a number of times on the channel, but I'll say it here again. My code sucked when I graduated from college. I was really good at solving problems and finding a way to make things work, but the overall organization and the patterns I was using were awful. And I didn't even realize that it was bad because it was already so much better than it was when I started college. But unknowingly, I had slipped into this bad habit of hack something together and get it to work so it passes the auto graders, submit it, and move on to the next thing. The issue is that most auto graders, at least back when I was in college, really just care about running test cases and making sure that the desired outcome is the result. I could write the gnarliest hack of all time, and I would get the exact same grade as everyone else who took the time to write the code nice and cleanly. What this can result in is really bad coding habits, and I have to imagine that a lot of other people in college struggled with this as well. Basically, college was training me to write disposable code that I was going to run once and then throw it away and never look at again, which is very different from what you do in industry, which is you write something that might be used for years and needs to be at production quality. In my first 6 months as a software engineer, no joke, I probably learned more than in all 4 years of college about how to write code the right way, just from getting hands-on experience and people reviewing my code and seeing how other people in industry actually write production code. But when I think back to some of the code that I was writing as part of my internships, my first internship in particular, I was really freaking proud of what I built. But now when I think about it, I just think about the state of the code that I left behind and how unmaintainable and how much of a rat's nest that was, and how much I would feel bad for anyone who needed to touch that code. And it wasn't because I was trying to be sloppy, it was because I just didn't know any better. I genuinely thought that I was writing pretty good code. Now, obviously this impacts everyone differently. I am sure there are some people who were writing really clean code back in college. Like I said, obviously I was not. But the sooner that you can recognize this, that you probably aren't writing super clean code, the sooner you can start doing something about it. I'm not saying that on every assignment or on every leak code problem, you need to be spending hours perfecting your code, but the sooner you start adding some intentionality and really thinking about what it means to write cleaner code, the better off you're going to be, and you're also probably going to do better in your interviews for your internships because the code you're writing is going to be much higher quality than what a lot of your peers are writing. And to build on top of that, the code that you write at those internships then is going to be up to a higher standard, which is only going to increase your chances of getting a return offer. So the earlier that you start building these good habits, the better. I know in the short term, it's going to make all of your assignments take longer and it's going to require more effort, but I promise you, in the long run, you're going to be better off because of it. I have several videos on the channel where I go deeper into this that I can link to, But if I look back at the trajectory that I had when I was in college, landing my freshman internship was probably one of the most important things that happened to me. Landing the internship freshman year really set me up well for my sophomore recruiting season, because unlike freshman year and a lot of other sophomores, instead of hearing the dreaded, "We're looking for someone with experience" line, I now actually had some experience. Of course, now the line that I was hearing from a lot of companies was, "We're focused on juniors," which you'll hear from a lot of companies. But because I had that internship on my resume, I got a lot more attention sophomore year. And having a strong sophomore internship set me up really well for my junior recruiting season, when I heard back from Amazon, 2 Sigma, Salesforce, Google, and ultimately went with Microsoft. And I'm not saying that none of this would have happened if I didn't have a freshman internship. I know plenty of people who didn't have a freshman internship or a sophomore internship and ended up with great junior internships or full-time offers. But I don't doubt that it made my life a lot easier, because getting that initial experience is really tough. But once you get it, a lot of doors start to open. Now, as I'm sure a lot of you already know, landing an internship as a freshman is easier said than done, obviously. But you can learn what not to do from me. Take it seriously. Apply a lot. I remember thinking that I needed to apply to a similar number of companies as the number of colleges I had applied to. It should be on a different order of magnitude, because the chances of you getting an internship at one of those companies, especially as a freshman, is so much lower than the chances of you getting into one of your colleges. Also, do interview prep. That's something that I did a little bit of that helped me squeak through some of the earlier rounds when I got an interview somewhere else. But ultimately, I just didn't know enough of the material yet to be able to get through the final rounds. And understandably, I didn't deserve that offer, and I didn't get it, because I really should have done more prep. And one final tip on this point, especially if you can target programs that are designed specifically for freshmen and sophomores, which I know there's a number of companies that have these types of programs, that'll keep you from needing to compete against juniors who probably have way more experience than you and also just know a lot more subject matter than you. So if you can find those types of opportunities, those are great ones to apply to. Some people are probably wondering why I am including this point, but if I think back to freshman year me, this is something that I probably would have benefited from hearing, so I'm just gonna go out on a limb and assume that there is someone else out there who would also benefit from this advice. When I came into college, I was fortunate that I already had some coding experience, so while I did have to learn some new languages, I had to learn Python in my first course and then Java in my second course, I was already over the hump in terms of learning the fundamentals and thinking in terms of code, which is really the hardest part of your first couple of months. As a result, I don't think I went to a single CS office hour for my entire freshman year. I figured I was doing well in my classes, I knew the material pretty well, and honestly, I felt kind of awkward going because if you couldn't already tell, I'm incredibly introverted. So the thought of going and talking to the professor or some of the TAs was kind of scary. Freshman year, I did go to a handful of other non-computer science office hours, and I remember how awkward that felt and that I would desperately try to avoid going to office hours unless I really felt like I needed to. And this, if you're anything like me, is exactly why you should be going to office hours. Because if you don't get comfortable with going to office hours when your classes aren't that hard, you're still going to try to avoid going when the classes actually do get hard. At which point you'll basically be self-sabotaging, because instead of going and getting the help that you need, and office hours can genuinely be very helpful, you just won't go because it feels weird. Force yourself to go a couple of times as a freshman, even if you don't really feel like you need to, just to get into the habit of it. Unless you know that material inside and out, there has got to be at least something that you could ask about at office hours that you could get a little bit more clarity around. But really, more importantly, it's just about getting comfortable with going and talking to the TAs or talking to the professor. Or maybe this really was just a me problem and everyone else felt perfectly confident going to office hours, in which case, on to the next point. This is something that I did not do, at least not as a freshman, but is something that I've come to learn over the years is incredibly valuable if you really want to learn your stuff. Teach other people what you know. The first thing that comes to mind is probably being a TA, and if you want to go that route, that's a great option. I know several people who are TAs, and you had to know your stuff really well because you had to be able to teach it to the class. A lot of the students who TA'd also happen to get interviews at some of the top companies, which I am sure is correlation and not causation, but those people also were more likely to do better in their interviews because they were always keeping sharp with the material since they needed to teach it, and also just had a lot more experience with how to talk through and walk through a problem compared to the average person who just doesn't have that kind of experience. But maybe you're like me, and the thought of standing in front of a bunch of people and teaching them about a subject is terrifying, even if you do happen to know that subject really well. It doesn't have to be anything formal. I remember being in the dorms or the dining halls and just being with friends and we weren't really teaching each other, but we were walking through concepts because either someone was struggling with it, so you're trying to explain it to them, or just a couple of people are going over some new material and you're helping to fill in the gaps of what you know that maybe they didn't get, and vice versa. Doing this is a great way to reinforce your learning, but probably more importantly, it reveals to you all of your blind spots, the things that maybe you don't really know why something works like that, because when you're trying to explain it to someone else, you realize you don't really know either. Like, if I told you that adding to the front of an array list is O of n time efficiency, could I explain to you in simple terms why that is for that particular data structure? Or did I just happen to memorize the efficiency? Or you can always teach people that you don't know, and you can just make videos and put them on the internet for random people to watch. There's been a number of things that I've talked about on this channel where I've needed to improve my own understanding of something to be able to make a video on it. Because even if I already know a lot about that subject, I need to know enough about it and how to explain it in a concise and easy to understand way so that I can teach it to someone else. So having this channel has actually been a great way for me to reinforce certain CS fundamentals. So if you really want to learn your stuff well, get in the habit of teaching it. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but chances are you can help some other people along the way, which is always good, and you'll be deepening your own understanding of whatever it is that you're teaching. All right, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like it, subscribe if you haven't already. That's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.